Welcome to the STEM Pathways with Rohan Sharma podcast, where we dive into the exciting world of science, technology, engineering, and math. In each episode, we share exciting stories, groundbreaking research, and inspiring interviews with experts and enthusiasts who are pushing the boundaries of innovation. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just curious about how the world works, join us as we explore the endless possibilities of STEM. Let's get started. Today, I'll be interviewing Gabe Krambs, who holds a JD from UW Madison. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so to get started, I wanted to ask what made you choose your major of mathematics and computer science for your bachelor's degree?
Yeah, I think I was always sort of advanced in math in high school, but really once I got to college, I'd done programming, I'd done a lot of IT stuff. This is, the early '90s, mind you, so it wasn't quite, how things were today, where everyone seems to have at least some interest in computer science and computers. Um, I think I'd always programmed. I'd actually started as a physics major in college and love physics. But one of my first jobs in college was actually teaching other students how to do basic web programming, so HTML, basic JavaScript, etc. And was kind of reminded, how much I enjoyed that, how much I enjoyed learning those things, how much I enjoyed building things. So at some point, I decided to maybe my sophomore year, decided to enter the computer science department at Madison. Um, I think with the math major as well, you get like 75% of the way there with the computer science major, and it just made sense. I loved math. I'd taken some advanced math courses already in college. It made sense to add on the math degree, but it really was a computer science degree. That's what I spent a lot of time in college doing. So I trying to think back why I decided. I think I just really enjoyed it. It was something that it was certainly challenging, but it was something that I loved staying up at night doing. And looking back, it's a piece of advice I have to people: if you find something, excuse me, that you love doing and is also a way to make a living, hold on to that. If you make that discovery, hold on to that. It's not. I know it's not always the case with everyone, and it's still a job. A job's a job, but I still to this day, 44 years old, love building things and writing code. And it's been lucrative as well. So it was the right choice for me at the time and in retrospect.
Yeah. So what was your first job out of college?
First job out of college. Well, I started, there's a software company, it was much more well known then, called Sonic Foundry here in Madison. They were sort of part of the dot-com boom around the year 2000. A Madison grad had actually founded it here. They became a public company before I started there. I actually had a family friend who worked there, so that was my first like real job in a company. Was an intern, an IT intern at 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 Sonic Foundry, and then I continued with that company after college. So it was a great entree into programming. When I started there, I certainly wasn't a programmer, wasn't an engineer, but I was an IT intern, and then became an IT employee, and that was frankly a great place to start because I learned computers inside and out. I could build my own computers. I knew how to troubleshoot everything under the sun on every operating system. So it was a great way just to learn a lot about computers. So yeah, that was my first job. Just lucky enough to have a company here in Madison that was local, but still very very advanced as far as being a big software company.
Yeah. So how long do you spend there?
Um, on and off, probably about 8 or 10 years. I actually took time off school at points because that job was so much fun and so lucrative. So probably worked there on and off even while I was at law school at Sonic Foundry. Um, you know, doing all kinds of things, everything like I said, IT, writing code. Probably the most interesting job I ever had there. They made at one point they made sort of video streaming software, and we had to test the software through servers on huge Sun servers. So in my little cube at work, we had this server that was probably the size of a chest, right? It was like 2 feet by 2 feet by 4 feet. Had this huge server. Had to figure out even how to. Most of it was just to figure out how to install an operating system on this old Sun server. So yeah, there for many years and did a lot of jobs there while I worked there.
Yeah. So what made you want to go to law school?
Good question. A lot of people ask me that. My dad was a lawyer. He was a district attorney. I always loved the law and um, loved thinking about it and reading about it and wanted to try grad school of some sort. I think you could go in computer science in your field, or anyone could go to law school, business school. So I went to law school and really enjoyed it. Like it was an amazing intellectual challenge. Like it was really hard and made me think a lot about society and business and just the way people interact a lot better. So it was time well spent. But I also think while I was there, I I realized how much I loved building software and building companies, and also saw my friends who went to law firms and weren't, making a lot of money, but weren't having a lot of fun. Um, I both really enjoyed my time at law school. I think it, helped prepare me for the future, but also I don't think, entertained the idea of practicing law in a law firm for very long after I got there.
Yeah. So what did you do once you finished?
Um, Probably in my last year of the 3 years in law school, started talking with a buddy of mine about a business idea he had. The idea was basically to allow parents, grandparents to invest for a child very easily and also take advantage of, you know, high high yield, investment vehicles like Vanguard, Admiral shares, things you'd have to have, minimums, high minimums to be able to get into these nice investment vehicles. We would pool people's money, invest them in that. I thought it was a great idea, so we just started working on it in our free time. I had no idea about the world of startups, about Silicon Valley. I was very naive in those ways, but we um, kind of pushed the business along and very naively emailed Sequoia Capital in Silicon Valley. For those who don't know, it is maybe the premier venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. They probably rolled their eyes when we emailed them. We had no revenue, no website, nothing. And they said, well, we're not interested, but you should try this thing called Y Combinator, which was an incubator in Silicon Valley. We were naive enough not to have even heard of Y Combinator at that point. We sent off we sent off our application, and they invited us out to Mountain View. And 3 months later, we were moving out to Mountain View to be part of the Y Combinator 2011 class. So that really obviously accelerated my sort of interest and success in startups. But again, we, had, weren't privy to this world at all. But they saw something in us and invited us out there, and we spent, a year in Palo Alto building the product.
Yeah. And as what did Y Combinator kind of help you with?
The biggest thing they did is make us quit our jobs and actually, you know, uh, go in the startup full time. I had just proposed to my now wife right before we went out there. Um, so it was on some level difficult to just kind of pack up and move out there. But I think, more than anything, that's what they got us to do, is to really try to commit to it. And, tons of other advice, just generally about building startups, getting a lot of user feedback, the whole being lean, just a lot of iteration. But on the other hand, we were a fintech startup, and I don't think they had a lot of expertise in that yet. They basically told us, just launch the thing, and then if you get in trouble for it, we will hire a law firm to help get you out. But I don't think they quite understood yet that you could actually go to jail, if you don't, if you make a bad mistake in the financial world. So we, but they did teach us a lot of things. Just it's just really about that iteration and not, and being very close to your users. And you think you know what they want, but you don't know what a user wants until you actually release something out into the wild. They start using it, start giving you feedback, start telling you what they really want. So I think that was the most important lesson that stuck with me to this day, and is still still the recipe for a startup or any company.
Yeah. So how many years do you spend working on this startup?
So yeah, that was probably about 2 years. I think we maybe a little bit ahead of our time. We ended up launching, um, and I had maybe started pulling away from the company at that point, but we launched on the back of another trust company. We'd actually tried to start our own bank or our own trust company to do this. And you probably don't, but for those that know the environment in 2008, well, after 2008, this is now 2012, but post post that environment, no one was starting a new bank, much less, two kids from Wisconsin that had no idea what they were doing. But we piggybacked on another trust company and started it. But it was, I think there was some issues of whether this was a security, whether it fell under the umbrella of a trust company. And we had a few states that we were operating in ask us if we were operating, if we were actually selling securities without a license. We had an argument against it, but we didn't have the money to sort of fight that sort of thing. So that wrapped up probably after 2 years, and we shut that down.
So what are your next steps?
So the next step is looking for the next thing. I didn't know if that was, a corporate job or a new startup. I got connected through Y Combinator message boards with a gentleman in Houston, Texas. His name was Kiwi Camera. As unlikely as that name is, he'd actually was the youngest person ever to graduate from Harvard Law School at 19. Incredibly intelligent person. And he had a law firm in Houston. And there's this process in law called discovery. It's basically when the two sides of a lawsuit ask each other for information. Very, very simply, but as you can imagine, it involves tons of documents, emails, a lot of sifting through those documents. And the e-discovery world was a world sort of stuck in legacy. I mean, this was 2012, but every app out there looked like it was built in the year 2000. So just not using modern web techniques that were established at that time. You know, could access it from anywhere in any browser. Just something we take for granted now, right? Oh yeah, I have an app. Of course, I can visit my browser on my phone. This wasn't always the case back then. Anyway, he had been very frustrated by those pieces of software, so wanted to start a company that built e-discovery software. Got connected with me. We built a first prototype in a couple weeks. A very, very simple prototype, but at least a proof of concept in a way. Ended up moving down to Houston and starting Disco with Kiwi. Brought another friend of mine down from Sonic Foundry, an amazing engineer with me, and together, and all the people we hired, we built that company up. I was there for 6 years before I moved back to Madison, and then in 2021, that company IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. So it was, that was a definitely more successful than my first startup. But no, not easy by any means, but it ended up more successfully.
Yeah. And what made you not want to work there anymore?
Um, not as so much not working there. I think we were just about to have our second child, my wife and I, and uh, we wanted to come back to Madison, and it just would have been, it was an in-office company. There weren't a lot of remote jobs then, and it felt weird, if I would have been remote. And it also just felt like naturally like the time to move on. I think a thing you learn in startups is that people who are right for a certain time period in the startup are not the right people for another time. I um, love and possibly excel at the 0 to 1. Right, I can just sit down by myself and build an end-to-end app, um, full stack, and get the thing moving quickly from a software point of view. What I'm less good at is and less enjoy is, as the app becomes very big, all the considerations. Then I less enjoy managing very large teams. That's not as fun for me. I just like to build. So there's different people for different times in startups, and that's a hard lesson to learn, especially as you're hiring people. Someone you hire, they're great for years 1 through 3, but then there becomes a point where you need to find someone with a different set of skills for years 3 through 5. And that's hard to make that decision because you love those people that took you from year 1 to 3. I mean, they change your life, right? But it's the nature of startups and new companies that things change. So it was the same for me. Um, my skill set and passion just kind of diverge a little bit from the company. And we also just wanted to move back to Madison. So I took a job with Amazon here in Madison, and we moved from Houston.
Yeah. So, as how long do you spend at Amazon?
So that was about 2 years. It's with the Madison actually has a subsidiary, one of the first, I think, first few subsidiaries that Amazon bought, called Shop here in town, and that was exciting. I think, talking about, later giving advice to people, like you learn you learn amazing things in startups, and you should have that experience in startups. Even if you don't start it yourself, you should go work at one. But you also learn amazing things at the really big companies that are just so good and so efficient at building software, and Amazon is one of those. So in the 2 years I spent there, I learned so much about the science and art of software engineering. So it was, in the end, wanted to do something different after those 2 years, but it was one of the most educational 2 years I've had for sure. So it was. I think at the time I made the decision because Chop Up was here and paid a good salary and would pay to move us from Houston to Madison. But in retrospect, it was a really great time, and it just met so many really smart people that I still work with and have hired or work with to this day. So yeah, it was a great couple of years there.
Yeah. So, where are you working today?
So where am I working today? So yeah, after Amazon, went to Zendesk for a couple of years, managed their sort of internal technical consulting team, basically making apps for external companies using Zendesk. Worked at InfoSec, a wonderful um, was a startup, wonderful company here in town. Uh, Founded, bootstrapped by a friend of mine, now a friend of mine, Jack Koziel, who's amazing. Who, if you haven't had on this podcast, you absolutely should. And then where did I go? And then, against all my better judgment, started a new startup in 2021. No, 2022. It was called Compound. It wasn't called Compound then, but it was in the wealth management space, basically building software for wealth managers. Met this gentleman, Christian High um, who was actually from the UK. Went to Y Combinator, had started another startup, wanted to do his own thing. So had worked. We built that up for a few years. And now I've sort of stepped back from that, still on the board there and doing some strategy things. But um, uh, yeah, so have a few things I'm looking at, maybe starting another startup soon, but sort of biding my time until then.
Yeah. So, I guess right now, I guess in the computer science field in general, a lot of people talk about how maybe like if you got into it 10, 15 years ago, it was kind of a gold mine. And then if you're a high school right now wanting to major in that is like super competitive and hard to even get a job. What do you think about that?
It's that's yeah, it's it may seem like that. It's not correct. I always hear people talk about the computer science, the engineer, the job market. It's up, it's down. It's always hard to find good engineers. That are good and motivated and you trust and work well with. So if you are, I don't see any time soon, maybe even in my lifetime, like good engineers, not having their pick of jobs. There are ebbs and flows as things go. It's sort of like when I was in law school, that was there's a huge market crash, and people were like, oh my God, they're not hiring lawyers. They're always hiring good lawyers, right? It's the people on the margins that maybe don't get hired right now. But if you are passionate and motivated and driven and really, you know, eh, eh, any profession is, but especially computer science and programming, it's about learning, it's about building things, it's about getting really good at your craft. And I just can't imagine a time when there isn't a great market for people, who are really good at their craft, even on the entry level, right? Um, so I would not anyone who's thinking about who anyone who enjoys it, it's one of those things to me, like you need to enjoy it because it's one of those professions, and I'm sure there are many others. You have to keep learning. Things are changing so quickly. I mean, look right now, if you're in the LLM or AI space, like eh, eh, you know 2 months from now, it's going to be totally different, right? You're going to have to use different tools, and it's just moving so quickly, and it's super exciting. But if you don't like that, then it's probably not for you. But if you enjoy like learning the latest thing, and staying up at nights, and you don't have to spend 80 hours a week, but like it really does. It's something you enjoy. Then I don't think you'll ever have a problem, finding a job. So, it's one of those things. It is just so it creates so much value, and it's so productive writing great software that um, you know I don't think it will again in my lifetime. You're a great engineer or you have great passion, whatever level you're at, entry level or principal level, you won't have a problem finding a job, and you just have to work a little harder this year compared to last year, but you'll get there.
Yeah. So for my last question, I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
that one piece of advice for someone who's still in high school or early in college wanting to follow a similar career path as you.
Yeah. So I think first of all, like I just said, you have to enjoy it. You just have to love building things. I think for any engineer type role, you have to just love tinkering and building things and learning on your own. Um, so that's super important. I think as far as finding a job, I would say, especially earlier in your career, find a company you really like and take any job there. It might be in like technical support, and that's fine because you're gonna learn so much about that product, about products in general, about how a company works. But B, that once you're in the company, it's so much easier to move up into a different role you want than it might be to come in entry level. So if there's one thing I would say to people, that's it, is just, especially early, find a company you love that you think you can learn a lot from. And even if you can't get the role you exactly want, um, just get in there anywhere, whether it's an intern, tech support, IT, go there, be really good at your job, be really good at that job, keep honing your craft of whatever it is you want to do with the rest of your career, um, and you very well might get a shot to move into that sort of role. And believe me, it's much easier to move into a role internally in a company than it is just sending them a cold resume, right, and an application. So that would be my probably biggest piece of advice, especially for people just starting out in their careers.
All right then. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Great, it's a pleasure.